My fiancée demanded I pay her student loans and support her lifestyle, so I disappeared and left her with nothing. I, 34, male, had been with Sarah, 32, female, for 5 years, engaged for 1. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I was instantly smitten. She was beautiful, witty, and seemed to share my passion for travel and good food. We had a whirlwind romance, and I genuinely believed she was the one. I had a decent job in tech, earning a comfortable 6-figure salary, and I owned a house outright thanks to a modest inheritance from my grandparents and years of disciplined saving. Sarah, on the other hand, was an aspiring artist, which I admired. She worked part-time at a gallery, but her income was sporadic and barely covered her personal expenses, let alone her considerable student loan debt. I never saw it as an issue. I was happy to support us both, within reason, and I believed in her dreams. Our engagement was magical. I proposed on a trip to Italy, overlooking the Tuscan hills. She cried, I cried, and for a while, it felt like nothing could possibly go wrong. We started planning the wedding, a relatively small affair with close friends and family. This is where the cracks began to show, slowly at first, then widening into gaping chasms. The initial discussions about wedding finances were the first red flag. I had always been transparent about my financial situation, including my house and savings. Sarah, however, became increasingly guarded about hers, often deflecting whenever the topic of her student loans came up. I knew she had them, of course, but I didn't know the extent. I made an offhand comment about us combining our finances after marriage, and she responded with a nervous laugh, saying, "Oh, we can talk about that later, darling." The wedding planning itself became a source of constant low-level friction. Sarah had expensive tastes, wanting the most elaborate floral arrangements, a designer dress, and a 5-star catering service. I tried to be accommodating, reminding her of our budget, which I was largely funding. She would get defensive, accusing me of being cheap and not caring about our special day. I chalked it up to wedding stress, something I'd heard many couples go through. One evening, about 6 months before the wedding, we were discussing our future, specifically where we would live. I had always assumed we'd live in my house. It was a comfortable, 3-bedroom home in a good neighborhood, fully paid for. Sarah, however, started hinting that she wanted a fresh start in a new place. "My dear," she said, stroking my arm, "your house is lovely, really, but it's just not us. We need a place that reflects our journey together, a blank canvas." I was confused. "But this is a blank canvas, honey. We can decorate it however we like." She just smiled mysteriously and changed the subject. A few weeks later, the true nature of her blank canvas desire became clear. We were at dinner with her parents, a rather affluent couple who, despite their wealth, never offered to contribute a dime to the wedding or anything else for that matter. Sarah's mother, a formidable woman with a penchant for designer clothes and subtle digs, casually mentioned, "Oh, darling, have you told John about your plans for the new house yet?" My ears perked up. Sarah shot her mother a look, but it was too late. Her mother continued, "Yes, a lovely penthouse in the city. So much more fitting for you too. Wouldn't you agree, John?" I was floored. I looked at Sarah, who was avoiding my gaze. "A penthouse?" I asked, my voice betraying my surprise. "What penthouse?" Sarah mumbled something about it being just an idea, but her mother was already showing me pictures on her phone of a ridiculously expensive-looking apartment building. The conversation quickly devolved into an argument between Sarah and her mother about spoiling the surprise, but I was left with a sinking feeling in my stomach. Later that night, Sarah confessed she had been looking at properties, just for fun, and that she thought it would be romantic for us to buy a new place together. When I pointed out the significant financial implications, she waved it off. "Oh, you'll manage, darling. You're so good with money." This was the first time I started feeling like a walking ATM. I decided it was time to get serious about our combined finances. I sat her down and gently broached the subject of her student loans again, explaining that for us to make any major financial decisions, I needed to understand our complete financial picture. She sighed dramatically. "Do we have to talk about this now? It's so boring." I insisted. After much prodding, she finally revealed the staggering amount, over $150,000. My jaw dropped. I knew it was substantial, but I had no idea it was that high. When I asked about her plan to pay it off, she just shrugged. "Well, that's what we'll do together, isn't it? As husband and wife." The implication was clear. She expected me to pay off her debt. All of it. I tried to explain that while I was willing to contribute, taking on such a massive debt entirely by myself, especially when she hadn't made significant efforts to pay it down herself, was a huge ask. She became irate. "So you're saying you won't help me? After all this time? I thought you loved me. Are you going to let me drown in debt?" She started crying, a familiar tactic that usually disarmed me. But this time, it felt manipulative. I stood my ground, explaining that we needed a plan, a joint effort. She stormed off, declaring that I was selfish and didn't care about her. The next few months were a roller coaster of arguments and uneasy truces. Every discussion about money ended in a fight. She started making veiled comments about my hoarding my wealth, comparing me to Scrooge McDuck. Her friends, a group of similarly ambitious but financially dependent women, started echoing her sentiments, making snide remarks about my lucky break with the inheritance and how I should share the wealth. I felt increasingly isolated and resentful. The final straw came a month before the wedding. We were at my house, going over last-minute details. She was looking at my watch, a sentimental piece gifted to me by my late grandfather. "This is a beautiful watch, darling," she said, admiring it. "It would look amazing on me." I chuckled. "It's a man's watch, honey, and it's an heirloom." She pouted. "Oh, don't be so possessive. We'll be married soon. What's yours will be mine, right?" That phrase, "what's yours will be mine," hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't about the watch. It was about everything. It wasn't about partnership. It was about acquisition. I realized, with a sickening lurch, that I was no longer marrying the woman I thought I knew. I was marrying someone who saw me as a means to an end, a financial safety net for her dreams and debts. Later that evening, after she had gone home, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every subtle hint, every argument. The penthouse, the student loans, the expensive wedding demands, the comments about my inheritance, the "what's yours will be mine" mentality. It all clicked into place. I was being used, and the realization was devastating. I loved her, or at least, I loved the idea of her, the woman I had fallen for. But this version, this calculating, entitled stranger, was not that woman that I spent the next few days in a haze of disbelief and anger. I considered confronting her, laying everything out, but I knew it would just lead to another dramatic scene, more tears, more accusations of selfishness. I realized that arguing with her was pointless. Her perspective was so entrenched that no amount of logic or reason would sway her. She genuinely believed she was entitled to my money, to my assets, to my future. Without contributing anything substantial in return, I started thinking about my options. Breaking off the engagement was obviously the first step. But how? And what about the financial fallout? We had already paid deposits for the venue, the caterer, the photographer. I stood to lose a significant amount of money. But then, a more insidious thought began to form in my mind, a plan born of hurt and a desire for self-preservation. If she saw me as a walking ATM, then I would simply close the account. I started meticulously planning my exit. First, I discreetly contacted a lawyer specializing in prenuptial agreements. He advised me that while a prenuptial agreement would have been ideal, it was too late given the wedding was so close. However, he also confirmed that in my state, assets owned prior to marriage, like my house, would generally remain separate property, provided they weren't commingled. This was a small comfort. Next, I began the process of liquidating my more liquid assets. I had a significant amount of money in a high-yield savings account and some investments. Over the course of a week, I slowly, carefully, transferred these funds into a new, separate account at a different bank, one she had no knowledge of. I made sure to leave enough in our joint account, which she primarily used, to cover the remaining wedding deposits and her usual spending for a short period. I didn't want to alert her to anything just yet. I then started making arrangements for my house. I contacted a real estate agent I trusted, explaining that I needed to sell quickly and discreetly. The market was hot, and my house was in a desirable location, so it wouldn't be difficult. I told the agent I was moving for a job opportunity and needed to close within 3 weeks. The most difficult part was keeping up appearances with Sarah. I forced myself to act normal, to go through the motions of wedding planning, to listen to her talk about our future as if nothing was wrong. It was excruciating, a constant knot in my stomach, but I knew I had to remain undetected until my plan was complete. She was too volatile, too prone to drama. If she caught wind of what I was doing, it would be an unholy mess. 3 weeks before the wedding, the house sale was finalized. I had found a cash buyer, which expedited the process considerably. The funds were transferred to my new, secret account. I then booked a flight to a small town in South America, a place I had always dreamed of visiting, a place where I knew no one and could truly disappear. I secured a long-term rental there, paid for several months in advance. The night before my flight, a mere 2 weeks before the wedding, I packed a single suitcase with essentials. I left a short, handwritten letter for Sarah on the kitchen counter, next to the engagement ring I had placed there. The letter was concise, devoid of emotion. It simply stated that I was ending our engagement, that I realized we wanted different things, and that I wished her well. I did not provide any explanation or contact information. I knew it was cowardly, but I couldn't face the inevitable explosion. I knew her personality. She would call my family, her family, friends, try to track me down, but I was determined to be untraceable. I drove to the airport in the dead of night, leaving my car in the long-term parking lot with a note inside for my lawyer, instructing him to sell it and donate the proceeds to a local animal shelter. I wanted no lingering ties, no loose ends she could exploit. When I landed in South America, I bought a local burner phone and deleted all my social media accounts. I created new email addresses and online identities for essential services. I had essentially vanished from my old life. The fallout, as expected, was immense. My old phone, which I had left behind with my lawyer, started buzzing with frantic calls and messages from Sarah, her family, and my own family within hours of her finding the letter. My lawyer handled it, informing them that I had broken off the engagement and moved away, declining to provide any further details. My parents were distraught, confused, and angry that I had just disappeared. They knew Sarah, and while they had their reservations about her, they didn't understand the depth of my despair. They tried to contact me through my lawyer, but I had instructed him to say I was unavailable and would contact them when I was ready. Sarah, according to my lawyer, was furious. She initially tried to accuse me of breach of contract for the wedding, demanding I cover all the expenses. My lawyer calmly informed her that a broken engagement did not constitute a breach of contract in that manner, and that any deposits made were largely non-refundable by the vendors themselves, not by me. She threatened legal action, but without knowing where I was or having access to my new assets, her threats were empty. She also apparently tried to claim that I had absconded with our money, but my lawyer provided evidence that all significant assets were solely in my name prior to our engagement. The joint account, which she had mostly depleted with wedding expenses and her personal spending, was almost empty. The most satisfying part, in a twisted sort of way, was hearing about her attempts to track me down. She apparently contacted private investigators, but without any current information, they hit a wall. She tried to leverage our mutual friends, but I had chosen them carefully over the years, and they were loyal to me, offering vague responses or feigning ignorance. My old life, for her, had become a ghost. My new life, in contrast, was peaceful. I spent my days exploring, learning Spanish, and volunteering at a local animal rescue. I found a small apartment overlooking the ocean, and for the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of freedom. I had shed the burden of a relationship that was slowly suffocating me, A relationship built on expectation and entitlement. It took months for the constant anxiety to subside, for the fear of being discovered to fade. Slowly, I reconnected with my parents, explaining to them, in careful detail, why I had done what I did. They were hurt by my sudden disappearance, but eventually understood the immense pressure I was under. They even admitted they had always had a bad feeling about Sarah, but hoped it would work out. A year later, I heard through a distant mutual acquaintance that Sarah was struggling. The wedding deposits were lost, her dreams of a lavish lifestyle were shattered, and she was still saddled with her student loan debt. She had apparently tried to get her parents to bail her out, but even they, it seemed, had grown tired of her constant demands. She was still working at the art gallery, still an aspiring artist, and apparently still bitter about the man who disappeared with her future. I felt a pang of something, not regret, but a complex mix of sadness for the woman I thought she was, and immense relief for the bullet I had dodged. I knew my actions were extreme, perhaps even cruel in their execution, but I honestly believed I had no other choice. I had tried to reason, to compromise, to communicate, but she had been unwilling to meet me halfway. She saw me as a resource to be exploited, not a partner to be cherished. And so, I became unavailable. I became nothing. And for the first time in a long time, I was truly free.